I want to start off with the economic side of things, not because the human side isn't important. It is much more important. It's extremely important, but you can't ignore the effect. It's interesting to see, like, well, how is this going to affect business? And I was listening to the Economist podcast this morning, and they said, look, we always tend to overestimate the economic impact of natural disasters because they are so dramatic. It turns out usually they don't have nearly the effects that you think they're going to have. And there's an article out today in the San Jose Mercury News essentially saying that same thing. It looks like there's going to be a tightness in the flash memory market, but most of the industry seems to be okay. One of the lucky things is most industrial complexes are located in the south of Japan. So they weren't as impacted by the earthquake as the companies up in the north. The two most pressing concerns for the industry are damage to the transportation infrastructure and reliability of power, according to Dale Ford at IHSI Supply. It could take as long as 2 months to resolve those problems. And I'm seeing that in a lot of places I'm reading. It's not so much that the factories can't work, or the factories are having a hard time getting back, but keeping them running and having the efficiencies of a constantly running factory is an issue because of the brownouts and the power issues. And also transportation. It's like you can make all the flash memory you want, but if you can't get it on a train and get it to a boat, and then get it shipped or get it to an airplane, it's going to be hard to sell it.
Yeah, and at first it feels a little bit morbid. Obviously, people are dealing with a massive, massive crisis on the other side of the world. But here in America, and I know we have listeners and viewers all over the world, it feels a little bit weird to be like, yeah, but well, my gizmos continue to be on time. But it is important to take a moment and take a long view and recognize what's going to happen to the distribution logistics of the way not only our electronics, but all the imports that we get from Japan, right, and all the affected areas.
Yeah, it's definitely not the most important story coming out of Japan, but that doesn't mean that it's should be ignored entirely. Some other really good stories coming out of Japan. Engadget reports today that AT&T, Sprint, Verizon, Dish Networks, Comcast, and Cox Communications have all announced plans under which free calls can be made to Japan, and as well as free text messages in a lot of cases between now and March 31st. So, for all the vitriol we were spewing at some of these companies earlier today, this is a good move, and I applaud them for it.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, and look, this is one of those times when it's like there's nothing but good to be done. You do good for the people. You do good publicity for yourself. We know the folks over at Apple kept their Wi-Fi on. They were allowing people to come in and actually bunk down in the Apple stores. It's brief moments like this where to see everyone come together and put aside, the bottom line for a brief moment makes everyone feel good.
Yeah, that Apple story is really touching. Kevin Rose had some emails that he posted on his blog about, it became that scene from the movie where everyone gathers around the electronics store and watches the TV broadcast, except for the modern era. Everyone was in the Apple store watching the live stream on the laptops that they have set up there. Also, Facebook set up a Japan earthquake page for users to find information about disaster relief. Google has set up a crisis response project. We've talked about that in the past, although an interesting spin on that. Google is now encouraging people to take photos of the posters with people's names with their cell phones and send them to an address tohoku.anpi.google@Picasa Web. And once sent, the photo will be automatically uploaded to the Picasa Web album where people can view this and keep track of each other. NTT Docomo, Japan's largest wireless carrier, has set up a database where you can enter the cell phone number of a person to confirm his or her safety. Just a lot of coming together of businesses large and small in this effort to try to help people out.
Now, this is interesting. In the chat room, Stephen M. just tweeted or sent over to us that Verizon's offering free access to TV Japan through their Fios TV service.
So
and I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, that's great.
That we see, I think it's fascinating that we see how the interconnectedness of our society nowadays not only makes possible massive amounts of relief. We saw with the Red Cross donations, is so super easy just to donate over your phone, but also in prevention of disaster. There was a recent tweet from Scientific American saying, and I forget the number, it was millions or billions of dollars were saved by proper planning and preparation for the tsunami. And in a case where time is of the essence, once you have an earthquake and you need to get the word out that we expect a massive tsunami to happen and you got to get to high ground, then it matters that all of a sudden everyone in the country is carrying on them a mobile device that keeps them interconnected with the rest of the whole freaking globe. It would be amazing. I'm sure some fascinating academic articles years from now will come out talking about how different technology has essentially shaped this disaster, both in the avoidance of it and in the recovery of it.
And it's funny how copyright issues go away when real important issues come along. For instance, TSS Aloic in the chat room points out NHK World is live streaming on Ustream right now. That'd be something they'd be sending a takedown notice for in the past. But we find out what's really important in these situations and do what's necessary. Also, an interesting thing on the this is actually from Wired. Talking about some of the games that were supposed to come out. We see this happen a lot when natural disasters come along. Games happen to have themes similar to the disaster, and everyone pulls them back. It's not zensorship. It's just saying, you know what, this is not the right time for this. So IREM will cease development on its PlayStation game Zettai Zetsume Toshi 4, City in a Desperate Situation. And there are a few other PS3 games that are being delayed for release because they deal with earthquakes and disaster themes, and I think that's appropriate. I mean, I think they come under criticism for the opposite if they put them out for being insensitive and trying to profit at something like that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think let's face it, the reason these games are popular is because we're all fascinated with massive disasters. But then when one happens, especially when it's all too real, we certainly want to dial back our involvement. We saw that with 9/11. They pushed back the movie and made some changes to the movie Collateral Damage. And what's funny is the little ways. There was an on-campus cafe called Ground Zero out in Eastern New Mexico University that all of a sudden they were not real happy with that name. And likewise, the band Anthrax for a while, not happy with their name during that scare. And when I went to Whole Foods to get sushi, it was very weird to grab a box of sushi that said tsunami package. And I was like, that's not cute right now. That's it's a major disaster.
And it's just coincidence. It's just these things aren't planned that way, but then they strike us that way. Finally, before we get to some of the user feedback from listeners, there's a lot of discussion on the internet today about radiation risks, about what's happening at the nuclear reactors in Japan, and I want to point to Maggie Kurth-Baker's post at Boing Boing. She says she's in the process of putting together a longer post that will add some context to the concept of radiation, but she did actually. She's like, the nuclear scientists are a little busy right now. They're not responding to my emails because I'm not a priority. But she actually did get some good information from Dr. Catherine Higley, head of Oregon State University's Department of Nuclear Engineering and Radiation Health Physics. And says that information keeps changing from the Fukushima power plant as the situation changes, but one plant worker received a 10 REM dose. That's twice the annual occupational dose, twice what regulators have deemed safe for someone who works in a nuclear power plant. Now, the interesting thing about this, you may think, wow, twice the dose, that's horrible. But that risk translates into a 1% increase into having some sort of cancer or some sort of health risk related to that radiation. So twice the radiation does not mean twice the risk. Obviously, it raises your risk, but 1%, actually 0.5 to 1%, is a lot different. So I like, Boing Boing is doing a great job, by the way, of covering this and trying to bust through the FUD and say, this is real. This is the PR that you're getting. This is what seems to be really happening on all sides of the issue, not just like, busting the FUD of the power plant, trying to contain the information about what's really happening, but also trying to bust through, people overreacting to the radiation issue. Radiation is a bad thing. I mean, I'm not saying it's okay, but you need to have some accurate sensibility about how bad it is in order to accurately estimate how bad the problem is.
Well, let me tell you, if you want to immediately cut past anyone's logic circuits and immediately make them scared, just mention nuclear radiation because it's so counterintuitive. It's this thing you can't see, touch, smell, or perceive in any way that can kill you. Nuclear fallout, of course, is a real problem. But one of the things that, and this is in no way meant to downplay the danger of the situation, but as people start throwing around the word Chernobyl, people really start to get worried. I want to point people to, there's a fantastic speech by Michael Crichton that you can find on YouTube. I believe it's called Fear and Complexity. And he talks about how he wanted to create a global disaster. So he looked up some research on Chernobyl. The initial estimates at the time were that 2,000 people died at the accident and that upwards of 400,000 people died through later complications because of exposure to radiation and cancers and that kind of thing. As he dug into the numbers, the actual numbers turned out that around 50 people died during the actual disaster, most of whom, about 30 of them, were fighting the fire live on the scene, and that's where they died. And that long-term cancers and infertility rates were such that basically only 4,000 to the day. Now, of course, the speech was written a while ago, and of course, there's some fact-checking to be done on that. But that is a massive difference from a perceived disaster to the actual number. And the one thing he points out that blew my mind was that the World Health Organization did a study on what the biggest impact of Chernobyl was, and they concluded that the number one negative impact of Chernobyl was not the radiation exposure, it was the perception of being told that you're going to die young, that you're going to be infertile, you can't have children, and that you've got nothing to live for. That's what caused the suicides and the early death rates and the unemployment and the malnutrition. And in this case, it wasn't that they were given bad radiation; they were given bad information. And as we do our next flirtation with this, it'll be interesting to see how our hyper-connected society tells the story of this potential nuclear disaster.
And it's actually the same issue we run in talking about politics. You run in and talking about radiation, where if you start to say, look, it's not as bad as they're saying, all of a sudden people say, so you're saying radiation is fine. So you're saying there's no risk. And that's not true. That is not what we're saying at all.
Not at all.
But there is, trying to find out what is the actual risk. There is a risk, but it's not helpful to say, like, it's radiation and therefore everyone's going to die. Because that doesn't help understand it either. Helpful.
It's actively harmful. Scientists are very familiar with something they call the nocebo effect. It's a negative placebo. They call it the death bone, the death rattle, where somebody points to you, they give you the evil eye, they say you're going to die, and people, sure enough, die. And so it's important that for the maximum health of society, that we be smart, that we avoid the radiation, that we handle the problem correctly, but that we not get wrapped up in this disaster explosion where we think that everything's over and it's the end of the days.
And what you need to do is you need to actually find good sources of information. Leo and I are talking about hopefully doing a triangulation with some nuclear scientists who can actually tell us, what is happening, what are the dangers, what are the risks, what do people actually need to be worried about. In the meantime, once you start to educate yourself on what, the damages, what the real damages of radiation, what the levels are to be worried about, there are a lot of great resources online right now for finding out what the radiation is, not only in Japan, but elsewhere in the world. A live Geiger counter is at alttokyo.com, updates a graph with data every 60 seconds. There's also a Ustream channel broadcasting the digital display of another Tokyo Geiger counter. That's been crashing. It's getting so many viewer emails. RadiationNetwork.com is a crowdsourced radiation monitoring network of roughly a dozen or so unofficial monitoring sites around the United States. So you got to take that into account. It's very low number, very unofficial, but it's updated every 3 minutes. And you can participate in that by buying, radiation detection equipment and going online. That's not something everyone's going to do, but if you're really into it, that's a great way to learn about stuff.
This is the BitTorrenting of radiation research here. When all of a sudden everybody, for example, their GeigerCounters.com is out of stock. They say due to the disaster in Japan, orders for Geiger counters has outstripped supply. This is fantastic. And again, it's a case where the hyper-connected society we live in make possible large-scale experiments and monitoring that never would have been possible even just 20 years ago during the Chernobyl disaster.
All right, let's move on to some of the first-person accounts here. We got one voicemail to 260-TNT show from Jason telling us a little bit about what's going on in his area. Thanks so much for calling, Jason, and I'm glad to hear everything is safe for you. I hope you stay safe. I play this also because it's a fascinating first-person account, but also it emphasizes the importance of being prepared, as any kind of disaster like this always does. Having your 72-hour plan for whatever it is in your area of the world, whether it's tsunamis or earthquakes or tornadoes or hurricanes, there's something dangerous. Maybe it's a snowstorm that can happen, some kind of natural disaster that you should be prepared for. And I think Jason is a good reminder of that.
And I tell you what, man, it's one of those things where it's very sobering when you think about how many things we totally take for granted. And even the nut jobs who for grins want to get ready for a zombie apocalypse, in a bizarre way, I'm like, at least you guys are saving water and food. You at least are ready for something, because it won't be zombies, but it will be something sooner or later.
Preparing for a zombie apocalypse actually prepares you for a lot of other things. So it's not necessary. If that's what it takes to get you interested, then great, go for it.
Pretended zombies. Pretended zombies. Just get ready. Just definitely have food, have water, have all that stuff available for your family.
On to the email, TNT@twit.tv. Steve in Tokyo says, I'm an English teacher living in Tokyo. Wanted to share some of the website I'm using to stay up to date on the latest event developments. RSOE. And the link is hisz.rsoe.hu. They have an alert map and a list of all disasters around the world, including the information and position of earthquakes soon after they happen, as well as information about the nuclear plants, which are all over the news. Yesterday in Tokyo, radiation levels spiked to about 8 times normal background levels for a short time. Although Tokyo is 250 kilometers away from the failing plant in Fukushima, there's always a risk for radioactive materials to be carried on the wind. The Natural Research Lab has a page tracking the radiation in Tokyo at park18.wak.com, as well as a live Ustream video of the Geiger counter we were talking about earlier. Aftershocks have been occurring consistently, and as I was writing this, there was a 6.0 that hit about 75 miles southwest of Tokyo. Given everything that's happening combined with planned rolling blackouts, a lot of companies are shutting down for a while, including Sony.
Oh, that is amazing. Got another email here. Some news today. No rolling blackouts near Kamiuka in Yokohama. Every area is going to be subjected to this until the end of April, as stated today. These blackouts take down stoplights, trains, and residential areas. Many people were caught off guard today as train lines either shut down partly through the day or never started. My wife works in Tokyo and attempted to go to work but didn't make it. Many people where I work made it in, but found the trains would not stop running, or would stop running before leaving work. Arrangements were to be made to let them go early, as they would have a long walk or a bus ride. Ride sharing is coming up so those with cars can help those without to get close to home. Some folks walked up to 4 hours Friday to get out of Tokyo. Boy, that's amazing.
So thanks to Eric, Steve, and Jason for sharing their stories with us. And thanks to everybody else who's also emailed us from Japan. These are a selection of the many emails we've been getting along similar lines, and we hope you all stay safe. We're going to that's the special Japanese section of the show for today. I want to thank everybody, again for participating in that. HP is moving into the space where they compete not only with people like IBM but Google as well, being a cloud service provider. You want to get your email, you want to get some app store, you want to do some stuff on the web, HP wants to be there. They sell the devices. They figure, why, we should keep making money after we sell the box to somebody. This could be difficult though, because a lot of folks who are what are called VARs, value-added resellers, are not happy about this message because they look at it and say, well, wait a minute, what's in it for us? We're used to taking the HP brands and kind of adding some value to it, putting some software on it, and moving it along, and we're in the supply chain that way. If you're selling the cloud infrastructure, then they don't need to buy from us. They're cutting them out of the supply chain.
I was really surprised by this story because nothing about Hewlett-Packard, HP, had, in my mind, was branded or associated with the cloud at all. Have they ever done anything like this before? Do they have any experience in the cloud computing?
They have some, but this is new. This is a new business for them. They certainly have lots of enterprise experience. Let's not short them there. But they have never done what Amazon has done. They have never done what IBM has done at that scale. So this is something that's, it's the kind of thing you have to do if you want to grow, but it's certainly risky. They also
do have a point in that they say they provide hardware for 7 of the 10 largest cloud services. And so from that perspective, I think it might be the kind of thing where they just found themselves sitting on a gold mine and they're like, why are other people making money on this? Why don't we jump on it? But the question, of course, is how do their clients who are buying all this stuff enjoy their provider suddenly becoming a competitor? I would imagine that would not go over really well.
Well, they're sitting there on the gold mine selling pickaxes to people, and then all of a sudden went, wait a minute, what if we just took these pickaxes in ourselves? And so they started going into the gold mine, and all the guys who were buying pickaxes are like, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing?
There's this awkward moment where they're walking in, and they're like, all right, so how do we do this, guys? We've been giving you pickaxes, but we'll hit the wall.
How do you use this pickaxe to get the gold out?
Right. This will be really interesting. I know that they've tried a lot of different strategies in the past. This is so far and I mean this purely from a marketing and branding perspective. It's so far of what I perceive their core competency. I'll be really interested to see how they pull this off, or if anyone says, let me go to the HP Cloudland for my apps.
Also, they mentioned that WebOS, HP Touchpad, coming in June. It looks like there's a leak from a retailer that might be coming for $500 in June. They'll have WebOS for PC. Remember, they're going to put WebOS on all of their Windows machines that they sell as a kind of a top layer, and that PC beta will definitely be out by year's end. They plan to ship 100 million WebOS devices this year, including tablets like the touchpad, phones like the PCs, and printers with WebOS as well. How
does the WebOS stack up against Android?
In what way?
Well, I mean, as far as robustness, as far as ease of use or whatever, because here's what I'm wondering is if I'm a developer right now, I only have to make my product twice. I only have to make it once.